أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Lesson number 105, Surah At-Taubah, ayah number 38 to 52. Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, O you who have believed, ma lakum, what is the matter with you? إِذَا قِيلَ لَكُمْ, that when it was said to you, انفروا في سبيل الله, go forth in the cause of Allah, إِثَاقَلْتُمْ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ, you adhered heavily to the earth. You clung to the earth. You refused to go forth. أَرَضِيتُمْ بِالْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا مِنَ الْآخِرَةِ, are you satisfied with the life of this world rather than the hereafter? فَمَا مَتَاعُ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا فِي الْآخِرَةِ إِلَّا قَلِيلٌ, but what is the enjoyment of worldly life compared to the hereafter except a very little? The beginning verses of Surah At-Tawbah were with regards to the Bara'ah. What was the Bara'ah? The declaration of disassociation from all of the mushrikeen. And all of these beginning verses were revealed together at once, and their theme is also the same. The remaining verses of Surah At-Tawbah, they are with regards to the Battle of Tabuk. They are with regards to the Battle of Tabuk, the expedition of Tabuk. The Battle of Tabuk was the last battle. It was the last battle in which the Prophet ﷺ participated himself. It was the last battle. And this expedition was led against the Romans. Who were the Romans? They were Christians. Basically, the Roman Empire. At that time, by Arabia, neighboring Arabia was the Roman Empire and also the Persian Empire. So over here in particular, the Romans. Now why was this expedition taken? Why did the Prophet ﷺ go towards the Roman Empire to have a battle with them? When the Prophet ﷺ returned from Hunayn, when he returned from the Battle of Hunayn, he was informed that there was a threat of attack from the Romans, and that the Romans had gathered up their forces at Ash-Sham. Ash-Sham, at that time, it was a border between Arabia and the Roman Empire. So the Romans had gathered up their forces over there, and they were preparing to attack the Muslims. And it wasn't just the Romans who had gathered up over there, but they had also made alliances with the Arab tribes who were over there. So together, all of them were preparing to attack the Muslims. And the Prophet ﷺ was also informed that the Heraclius, the king of the Romans, he had supplied a year worth supplies to the Roman army. So basically, he had provided an entire year's supplies to the Roman army. So just imagine their number, just imagine their wealth, and just imagine how fully trained and how fully loaded they were to be able to attack the Muslims. And this expedition, it took place in the year 9 after Hijrah, in the month of Rajab. Now the question is, why were the Romans preparing to attack the Muslims? Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ, after he conquered Mecca, and then also after the conquest of Hunayn, basically after he fought against the tribes of Hawazin and Saqif, what happened? The mushrikeen, their power was broken. Their power was completely broken. And the Muslims were rising as a unified power. Up until now, the Arabs were scattered all over Arabia. There was no single unified body of the Arabs rising together. They were all scattered up. And all of the time they were fighting against one another. So the neighboring empires, the Romans, they never cared about the Arabs. Why? There was nothing in Arabia. It was desert. And besides, the Arabs were not a threat to them. But now all of a sudden, these people are getting together under the banner of Islam. So the Romans, they considered the Muslims to be a threat to their power. So because of that reason, they were preparing to attack the Muslims. However, there was another reason as well. And what was that? Remember at the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, what was one of the clauses? One of the clauses of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah? That there was supposed to be no battle between the Muslims and the Mushrikeen for the next 10 years. So the Prophet ﷺ, he took advantage of this time of peace. And what did he do? He sent messages of Tawheed of Islam to different areas, to Arabia as well as beyond. So the Prophet ﷺ sent his messengers, sent his ambassadors, his envoys, where? Outside of Arabia as well, to convey the message of Tawheed to those people. Because now the Muslims were safe. There wasn't supposed to be any battle between the Muslims and the Mushrikeen. So the Prophet ﷺ took advantage of this. And the Prophet ﷺ sent his envoys, his messengers all over. And as a result of that, many delegations came to Medina and became Muslim at the hand of the Prophet ﷺ and accepted Islam. Now, of these delegations that the Prophet ﷺ had sent, he sent one to Ash-Sham as well. Again, where is Ash-Sham? What is Ash-Sham? The borders. And he sent his messenger to who? To the Christians. In particular to who? To the Christians. So basically the Roman Christians, which resided in the Byzantine Empire. Now this delegation that the Prophet ﷺ sent, it consisted of 15 Muslims. How many? 15. And they were led by Ka'b ibn Umayr al-Ghifari. They were led by who? Ka'b ibn Umayr al-Ghifari. Now once the delegation reached there, they conveyed the message. They met with rejection. So basically the Christians, they rejected them. But they didn't only reject them, they actually attacked them. And they killed 12 out of those 15 Muslims. And only Ka'b, radiyallahu anhu, he managed to return to Medina alive, but obviously he was wounded. So basically he was the only survivor. 12 of them were killed immediately over there. Now this was not just a murder of 12 people. What was this? Hostility shown towards who? Towards Muslims. Because if someone is killed because of his religion, then that is waging war against not just that one person and his family, but against all those people who have that religion. And this was not just a matter of religion. This was the Romans showing hostility to the Arabs. This was Romans waging war against who? Against the Arabs. So 12 of them were killed. The Prophet ﷺ, obviously he was going to take action against them. The Prophet ﷺ also sent after this incident Al-Harith ibn Umayr al-Azdi as an envoy, as an ambassador to the ruler of Busra. This is not Basra. What is it? Busra, with a dhamma on the back. So he sent a letter to who? To the ruler of Busra. On the way, Al-Harith, he met a man by the name of Sharahbil ibn Amr al-Qassani. So he was a Roman. And Sharahbil, he was also a Roman officer. He was very close to the Roman king. Sharahbil asked Al-Harith, where are you going? What are you doing over here? He was an Arab. So he asked him, what are you doing over here? He said, I'm on my way to the ruler of Busra. So on finding out that he was on his way to the ruler of Busra, he killed him. Now again, this was not just a murder of one person. Who was being killed? The ambassador of the Prophet ﷺ. The ambassador of Muslims, not just Muslims, but also the Arabs. Now just imagine a country, they send their ambassador to another country and they kill him. Imagine. And it's not just the random people who kill him, it's actually the officers who kill him. Is that acceptable? It's not acceptable. It's a great offense. And it's an offense to the entire nation. So therefore, the Prophet ﷺ, he took action against the Romans. And how did he do that? We learned that in the year 8 after Hijrah, in the month of Jumadil Ula, the Prophet ﷺ prepared an army of 3,000 people. How many? 3,000. And these 3,000 Muslims, they were led by Zayd ibn al-Haritha. They were led by who? Zayd ibn al-Haritha. And he sent them towards Mutah. Mutah. How is it spelled? Mim, waw with the hamza on it, and ta marbuta. Mutah. And Mutah is towards Syria, again Ash-Sham. So why did he send these 3,000 people to Mutah? To fight who? The Romans. How many Romans were there to face these Muslims? Any idea? 200,000. How many Muslims were there? 3,000. And how many Romans were there? 200,000. Now when the Muslims got there was a debate as to whether or not they should go forth, whether or not they should even fight the enemy. And they thought of sending a letter to the Prophet ﷺ seeking his advice. However, some companions said, we should not do this. The Prophet ﷺ sent us over here, we cannot retreat. If we retreat, if we return, and if we don't fight, this would be accepting defeat. So, let's take benefit from this opportunity. Either it is martyrdom for us or victory. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us victory. And the Muslims had experienced by now that it was not their numbers. It was not their numbers that brought them victory. What is it that brought them victory? It was their faith. It was their sabr. It was their trust upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what happened? The Muslims, they began fighting the Roman army. This was in the year 8 after Hijrah. Was the Prophet ﷺ in this army? No. It was 3,000 Sahaba led by who? Zayd ibn al-Haritha. The Prophet ﷺ had given instructions that if Zayd anhu is martyred in the battle, then Ja'far ibn Abi Talib would replace him. And if Ja'far ibn Abi Talib is martyred, then Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he would succeed Ja'far radiyallahu anhu. So what happened? All of them fell one after the other. One after the other. Zayd radiyallahu anhu got martyred, Ja'far radiyallahu anhu, he also got martyred, and Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he also got martyred. Now at this point, there was no leader in the Muslim army. And just imagine they're facing 200,000 people. 200,000 Romans. So what happened? The Muslims unanimously, they agreed, imagine in the midst of the battle, they appointed Khalid ibn Walid to be their leader. Khalid ibn Walid, who was he? Up until now, he had been fighting against the Muslims. Now, he was leading the army of the Muslims. And Khalid ibn Walid was famous for his war strategy. And at this point, he used war strategy. And what was that? He began shuffling the wings of the Muslim army, the right side and the left side of the Muslim army. So basically, he sent the right side to the left side and the left side to the right side. And in the process, what he did was that he got a group of the Muslims and he sent them forth from the middle. So it appeared to the Romans that from the middle of the Muslim army, fresh reinforcements are coming in. And the Romans weren't expecting that at all. So that was a shock for them, and they got frightened. And then Khalid bin Walid, he used war tactics and he began retreating as if to show that the Romans were being surrounded by the Muslims and they were being led by the Muslims into the heart of the desert. So basically, they let the Romans come in, and the Romans realized that we're being trapped. And imagine there are only 3,000 Muslims and 200,000 Romans. So he used war strategy, and the Romans, they figured out that they're being trapped. So what did they do? They left the battlefield. And the Muslims, they went back to Medina. Now at this point, Khalid ibn Walid, he used war strategy to retreat from the battlefield. They did not run away from the battlefield. They did not flee from the battlefield. What did they do? They used war strategy. And remember, we learned earlier that in case of war strategy, it is permissible. Because at this point, if the Muslims continued to fight, they were only 3,000 and the Romans were 200,000. So it was extremely difficult. And the Muslims, they lost only a few of them. About 15 or 20. Very few Muslims got martyred in this battle. And they managed to return to Medina. Now this battle was not decisive. This battle was not decisive. Because what happened? The Romans left. Nobody accepted their defeat. Nobody became victorious. It was not decisive. So the Muslims, when they went back to Medina, and the Romans went back, the Romans, they wished to attack the Muslims again. Because for them, this was a great surprise. They thought Arabs who know nothing, people who are very few in number, they cannot even stand against us. So they wanted to attack the Muslims and finish their power completely. Therefore, in the year 9 after Hijrah, what did they do? They began collecting their forces at Ash-Sham in order to come and attack the Muslims in Arabia. You understand? So when the Prophet ﷺ found out that the Romans are gathering up again, what did he do? He announced to the Muslims that we have to go for battle. We have to go and attack the Romans. So basically he did not let the Romans come into Arabia and attack the Muslims over there. And the Prophet ﷺ had only heard news about the Romans gathering together. So the Prophet ﷺ, he collected an army of how many? 30,000. At the Battle of Tabuk, expedition of Tabuk, how many Muslims were there? 30,000. But when the Prophet ﷺ informed the Muslims, or rather when the people of Medina, when they learned that the Romans were gathering up to attack the Muslims, what happened? Fear spread amongst the believers. Fear. They became very afraid. They became very scared. When they got to know that the Romans were gathering up to attack the Muslims, they became very scared. Why? Because they had known about the Battle of Mutah. That the Romans were 200,000 at that time. Now just imagine a year after, if they're coming to break our power, how many would they be? How much more force would they bring with them? How much more resources would they bring with them? So obviously the Muslims, they got afraid. And this fear is what is being mentioned in this ayah. That when you were told, go forth in the way of Allah, what happened to you? You became scared? And you preferred to stay at home? You didn't want to go forth? And this fear can be understood by a famous incident in which Umar radiallahu anhu, he mentions that when the Prophet ﷺ, he kept away from his wives for a month. He swore an oath and he said, I'm not going to go to any of my wives. Basically, he was a little upset for some reason. So for a month, he stayed away from his wives. Umar radiallahu anhu, he had an Ansari friend. And what they would do is that they would take turns to go and attend the Prophet ﷺ's gatherings. Why? So that one could go to work one day, the other could go to work the other day. And neither of them would miss what the Prophet ﷺ was teaching. So whatever Umar radiallahu anhu missed out on, his Ansari friend would come and tell him. Whatever he missed out on, Umar radiallahu anhu would go and tell him. So one day his Ansari friend, he came back and he began knocking on the door. And Umar radiallahu anhu said, what happened? Have the Romans come? And he said, no, it's something much worse than that. And he said, what? He said the Prophet ﷺ has left his wives. Because initially the people thought that the Prophet ﷺ had divorced all of them. And Umar radiallahu anhu's daughter was a wife of the Prophet ﷺ. So you can imagine how fearful the believers were in Medina, that any sound, any news, like, have the Romans come? It was very scary for them. And on top of that, the people who were coming from Ash-Sham as traders in Medina, they were also bringing in news of the Roman army. That the Romans have gathered up, this is how many they are, this is how much resources they have, and there are so many, you cannot counter them. So because of this reason, there was a lot of fear amongst the Muslims to face the Romans. However, the Prophet ﷺ, despite all of that, he commanded that the Muslims must go and fight the Romans in Ash-Sham. Because if the Romans were allowed inside of Arabia, then what would happen? The hypocrites would join them, and this would result in great loss for the Muslims. And besides, up until now, people were very impressed by the military power of Muslims. So if the Muslims went from Medina to Tabuk, if they went all the way to fight the Romans, this would further impress the people of the Muslims' military power. And this was very important, because the Muslims were now rising as a major power. And generally when the Prophet ﷺ would go for any battle, he would not tell the people as to where exactly they were going. Why? Because many of the times even the Prophet ﷺ would be unaware. Isn't it so? Like for example, when they went out for the Battle of Badr, they didn't know they were going to go face an army when they left. However, at this point, the Prophet ﷺ told everyone, we are going to Tabuk to face the Romans. He made it known to everybody. It was very clear. Clear instructions were given. And at the same time, a clear command was given that everyone has to go. Everyone must go. Why? Why everyone? Why not just a few people? Or why not just those people who want to go? Because each and every person was needed. The circumstances were such, the situation was such, that everyone's services were needed. Like for example, when a country goes to war, sometimes what happens? Only the army goes. But other times, in other situations, every man who is able is required to participate in the army. Isn't it so? Even if he does not want to. And we have seen in history this has happened several times, where people do not want to go for battle, but they're forced. Why? Because they're living in that country. And when the leader tells them, they have to go. Similarly, the Prophet ﷺ made it clear to everybody that everybody must go. So, he sent word to Mecca, he sent word all over Arabia to all of the Muslims, telling them to gather up so that they could go and fight the Romans. Now this journey was supposed to be a very difficult journey. Why? Because first of all, Asham is very far from Medina. Very far. It's about 500 kilometers plus. At the same time, the weather, it was extremely hot. And on top of that, there was drought. So just imagine how difficult it must have been for the people to go. And on top of that, they didn't even have enough resources. It is said that about 18 people would share a camel. Just imagine, not 2, 18. And there were times where the Muslims ran out of food completely. You know what they would eat? Leaves. They ran out of food completely. And there were times when they had to slaughter their camels, which were very dear to them. Because if you slaughter your camel, then what will you ride on? But they had to slaughter their camels. Why? To get food as well as the water that had been stored in the stomach of the camel. You know camels, how they drink? They drink a lot of water at once and they store it inside their stomachs. Now just imagine the difficulty, the hot weather, the heat of the desert, and the lack of resources, that you need water, you're desperate for water. So imagine the camels were slaughtered and the water that was stored inside the stomach of the camel, that people would drink in order to survive. So it was an extremely difficult journey, and people knew that this journey would be very difficult. And on top of that, you have to face the Romans, who are a superpower. So, when this sense of fear was amongst the Muslims, or this feeling of reluctance, of hesitation, where people were not willing to go forth immediately, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhal ladina amanu, O you who have believed, malakum, what is wrong with you? What happened to you? Why did this happen? This istifham, interrogation, is for the purpose of tawbih. What does tawbih mean? Reproach, as well as inkar, that you should not be like this. This should not have been the case. Malakum, what is wrong with you? What happened to you? That إِذَا قِيلَ لَكُمْ, when it was said to you, by who? By the Prophet ﷺ. Clearly he instructed that infiru fi sabilillah, go forth in the way of Allah. Instead of going forth, what did you do? إِسَّاقَلْتُمْ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ, you heavily weighed down to the earth. You clung to the earth. You refused to go forth. You became very hesitant. You became very reluctant. Whereas the Prophet ﷺ, he commanded you. إِذَا قِيلَ لَكُمْ, he commanded you very clearly. As I mentioned to you, the Prophet ﷺ made it known to people as to where they were going, and he made it incumbent on everyone that they must go. When it comes to jihad, there are 2 levels of jihad, of the command for jihad. One is fard kifaya. What does it mean by that? That it's an obligation upon the nation as a whole. And in that case, if some people do it, then everybody is okay. Like for example, if a Muslim nation has a standing army, whenever there is a need, that army goes forth. every single individual is not going. Who's going forth? Only a few people. And when they are going forth, this is sufficient for everyone else. Just as Salatul Janazah, every single person does not have to pray. However, some people must pray, because if they don't, if nobody does, then everybody will be held responsible. But there is another case in which jihad becomes fard ayn. It becomes an obligation upon every single individual. When it becomes an obligation upon every single individual, when each person is required to participate. This command was of what? Fard ayn. So when the Prophet ﷺ commanded you, infiru fi sabilillah, go forth in the way of Allah. Infiru is from the root letters nun fara, nafara. And nafara literally means to scatter, to spread. If there is a huge number of people, if there is a huge gathering of people, even if they're together in one place, they will be scattered all over that area. Isn't it so? You will rarely find all of those people together sitting in one place. They will be scattered all over the area. The word nafara, when the word is used with an, when the word nafara is used with an, it means to be averse to something, to abstain from going towards it. When the word nafara is used with ila, nafara ila, it means to run towards something, to rush towards something with enthusiasm. And when the word nafara is used with fi, like over here, it means to go forth in the cause of, in the way of, for the sake of. You understand? So nafara fi, infiru fi, meaning go forth in the cause of, go forth in the way of. And when a leader, when an imam, when he says to his people infiru, then everyone is called for the service. Everyone must go. Not just the soldiers, but every single individual. And from this, the word nafir is used for an army. What is it used for? An army. Which army? That goes forth for battle. Do you understand? Nafara is to go out for battle. Nafara fi, to go forth in battle for the sake of, in the cause of. So when you were told, go forth in the way of Allah, meaning towards Tabuk, and Tabuk is how far from Medina? About 500 kilometers plus. You were told to go out in the way of Allah, meaning for jihad. What was your reaction? Instead of going forth immediately, Escalating ila al-ard, you weighed heavily to the earth. Escalating is from the root letters sa, qaf, lam. Thiql. What does thiql mean? Saqil, heavy. And tathaqul is to feel the burden of something. To feel the burden of something. To find something burdensome. To find something burdensome. And it's not just to find something burdensome, but it is to bend down, to find it very difficult to move, to continue going forth because of the weight. Like for example, if you're carrying a heavy bag, physically it's very heavy. It's going to be very difficult for you to move, to go on, unless if that bag has wheels on it. Otherwise, if you have to carry it, it's going to be extremely difficult for you. So tathaqul is to feel the burden of something, to feel burdensome, and because of that burden, to feel unable to go forth. And sometimes this weight, this burden is tangible, and other times it is intangible. Isn't it so? Sometimes if you're carrying a heavy bag, it's difficult for you to go forth. Other times if you have a load of worries and fears in your mind, even if you're not carrying anything in your hand, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to keep going on. Isn't it? You get overwhelmed. You're like, this is too much. I can't continue. This is getting very difficult. This is what tathaqul is. So you thought of going out for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be something very burdensome. What happened to you? This should not have been your reaction. When the Prophet ﷺ told you that you have to go, then you should have gone forth. Why did you Escalating ila al-ard? Why did you feel sluggish? Why did you feel very burdensome? And you wish to stay back home. Escalating ila al-ard. And why has it been said ila al-ard? Meaning you adhered heavily to the earth, to the comfort of this life, to the enjoyment of this life. As I mentioned to you, that season was of drought. And it was also extremely hot. And to cross through the desert with limited resources was something very scary, very daunting. And because it was very daunting for some people did not wish to go forth in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And remember, this is not about the hypocrites. Who is being addressed in this ayah? Ya ayyuhal ladina amanu. So we see that when the Prophet ﷺ told the believers we have to go, the believers responded in different ways. First of all, there was the group of believers who responded immediately. They said labbaik. Amongst them were who? Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu, Umar radhiyallahu anhu, Uthman radhiyallahu anhu. So many companions, they said labbaik immediately. There were some other believers who were hesitant initially. They hesitated initially, but then eventually they went along with the Muslims. They were hesitant at the beginning. They thought, oh my God, this is very difficult. What are we doing? You serious? We can do this? Thirdly, there was a group of those who remained behind because of a genuine reason. Because of some udhr. They weren't able to go forth. There was some genuine reason preventing them from going out in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And fourthly, there were those who remained behind only because of procrastination and laziness. They thought, okay, I'll go one day. Okay, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. And I'll go and catch up with the Muslims. While the Muslims were preparing, they're like, yes, I will also prepare, but right now I'm too busy. Next week I'll start preparing. Tomorrow I will start preparing. But this continued until the Muslims went and they returned. So there were some believers who didn't even go forth for the battle. Why? Only because of procrastination and laziness. So who is being addressed over here? Those who were hesitant initially, as well as those who remained behind and did not go forth. What happened to you? You were given a clear command. You were supposed to go out in the way of Allah. But you stayed back at home. Escalating ila al-ard. And you didn't want to go forth in the way of Allah? أَرَضِيتُمْ بِالْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا? Is it that you have become very happy and pleased and content with the life of this world? Why didn't you go forward? What stopped you? What prevented you? Is it that you're so happy with your comforts in your homes that you didn't want to go out in the way of Allah? Because there was drought? In Medina there was going to be shade under the trees. There was also going to be cool water. There was also going to be dates, fresh food. Now imagine somebody's leaving all of this and he's going where? Where is he going? To the Battle of Tabuk. And when was this? After the Battle of Hunain, after the victory of Hunain, after the conquest of Makkah. And the Muslims up until this point, they had had several victories and they had also gained a lot of war booty. And for the past 8 years, what had the Muslims been engaged in mainly? Battle. And now was the time that when they had come back home from the conquest of Makkah, from the conquest of Hunain, now was the time to relax. Now was the time to enjoy your freedom, to enjoy your peace. And all of a sudden you're told, there is an expedition which is much more difficult than any expedition that you undertook. أَرَضِيتُمْ بِالْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا? That after all this hard work, you want to take it easy and stay at home and relax? أَرَضِيتُمْ بِالْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا? This is not the way of the believer. His way is of constant toil. Constantly he's working and striving in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No matter what he has done, he never thinks that is enough. He keeps going on. أَرَضِيتُمْ بِالْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. If you're content with the life of this world, min al-akhirah, instead of the hereafter, then remember that فَمَا مَتَاعُ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا فِي الْآخِرَةِ إِلَّا قَلِيلٌ. Then the enjoyment, the pleasure of this worldly life, fil akhirah, in comparison to the hereafter, is nothing illa qaleel, except only a little bit. The enjoyment of the hereafter is much greater, and the enjoyment of this dunya is very little. The Prophet ﷺ said, the life of this world, compared to the hereafter, is just like when one of you dips his finger in the sea. Dip your finger in the sea. Just imagine. Let him contemplate how much of it his finger would carry. How much water will your finger take out from the sea? That is the enjoyment of this world. And the enjoyment of the hereafter is how much? The rest of the sea. This is the matar of dunya compared to the benefit, the enjoyment of the hereafter. This dunya is very short-lived. It will pass in the blink of an eye. Whereas the hereafter, it is eternal. If you look at it, if a person lives in this dunya for 100 years, and he lives a life of enjoyment, no hardship, eventually where is he going to end up? In the grave. How long will he stay there? Perhaps thousands of years. And then on top of that, the day of judgment itself is 50,000 years. And then in the final destination, it's Khalidina fiha abada. What is the dunya compared to the hereafter? It's nothing. So you have become happy and content with this worldly life? That because of this, you don't want to go forth in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Abdul Aziz ibn al-Hazim, he narrated that his father said, when Abdul Aziz ibn Marwan, who was he? Abdul Aziz ibn Marwan. He was basically one of the leaders of the Muslims after the Khulafa Rashidin, much later. Okay? So he was one of the leaders of the Muslims. Much later after the Khulafa Rashidin. So when this person, when he was dying, just imagine he had been living as a king, as a ruler, for so many years. He said, bring the shroud that I will be covered with, so that I can see it. Bring it to me, the shroud that I will be covered in, my kafan, so that I can see it, I can inspect it. When it was placed before him, he looked at it and he said, is this what I will end up with from this life? This whole dunya that I have lived in, all of these years that I've enjoyed, I enjoyed so many clothes, I enjoyed so many foods, I enjoyed my house, I enjoyed so much. All of that dunya, I'm going to leave it behind, and what am I going to take with me? This one piece of garment. One piece of garment, which is only a few yards. He then turned his back and he cried, and he was saying, woe to you, O life. Woe to you, O life. Your abundance is truly little. Your abundance is truly little. And your little is short-lived. The benefit of this dunya is very little. And that little is also short-lived. It's not that long, only for a few years. And we were deceived by you. We were deceived by you. We were fooled by you. We thought this dunya is so important. This comfort of this life is so important that even when the messenger is telling us we have to go forth, what is our reaction? We want to stay back at home. We want to enjoy the shades. We want to enjoy the fresh food and water. We don't want to put in effort. We've done enough for so many years. It's our time to take a break now, to relax and have some fun. You see, the journey to the Tabuk was a long one. The enemy was also much greater. And the provisions were also very short. They were also very short. Obviously, this journey was very daunting. And there were some people who were afraid, who were hesitant. When it comes to serving the deen, when it comes to learning the deen, when it comes to working for the deen, there are two types of people. One is of those who serve the deen and take it at the level of sacrifice. That no matter what situation in life they're in, No matter how hard and difficult and daunting the task may seem, they still do it. Why? Because they have committed themselves to serving the deen. No matter what situation in life they're in, no matter how daunting the task is, they will still do it. They will sacrifice their sleep, they will sacrifice their comfort, their free time, their break, their holidays, everything. Why? To serve the deen. Because the deen is their priority. As we learned earlier in Surah At-Taubah, that قُلْ إِن كَانَ آبَاؤُكُمْ وَأَبْنَاؤُكُمْ, if all of these people and all of these things are more beloved to you, then there is a problem. What should a believer give priority to in his life? Allah, His Messenger, and struggling in the way of Allah. So one group is of such people. And there is another group of people who serve the deen, who strive for the deen only when it is convenient for them. Only when it is convenient for them. When they see some immediate benefit. When they see some immediate gratification. When they don't have to put in too much effort. When the work is not too difficult. When it does not require them to sacrifice anything from their personal life. If they have extra time, when they have done everything else, then what will they do? They will give those few hours, few moments, few months, few weeks for what? For the deen. But the prime of their life, the main time, where does it go? Where does it go? For the dunya, to satisfy themselves. So there are two types of people. One are those who serve the deen only when it's convenient for them. And those, on the other hand, who serve the deen not just when it is convenient for them, but every time some work is needed. They don't look at themselves. They don't look at their situation. What do they look at? The situation that the deen is in. The work that is needed. The work that is required. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. And until and unless the akhirah becomes more important to a person, it becomes more real, it becomes his main goal, he cannot sacrifice for the deen. If dunya is a target, if dunya is a priority, then what will a person do? He will work for the deen part-time and full-time for the dunya. But if the hereafter is his priority, then he will work for the hereafter full-time and for the dunya only part-time. So in this ayah, who is being addressed? Those people who remain behind from the expedition only because of personal reasons. They didn't think it was convenient for them to go forth for the battle. But what is the lesson in this ayah for us? What is the lesson in this ayah for us? That we have to strive for the deen, whether we are comfortable, whether we find it convenient or not. Because we should not be looking at ourselves. What should we be looking at? The deen. If really the deen is more important to us, then we will not look at our own comfort. We will not look at our own sleep. We will not say, oh, I've been working for so long, I need a break. No.